Two massive tech firms were locked in a boardroom battle for a $500 million acquisition. For 6 hours, 20 executives in tailored suits argued over patent valuations, severance packages, and tax liabilities. The air was thick with tension, spreadsheets were slammed onto the table, and voices were raised until they cracked. In the center of the room sat two men who hadn't said a single word, the actual owners of the two empires. They weren't looking at the spreadsheets. They weren't listening to the lawyers. One of them simply checked his watch, caught the eye of the other, and gave a nearly invisible nod. Within 10 minutes, the heated debate suddenly found a resolution. The lawyers thought they had won a hard-fought battle. In reality, the price had been settled 3 days earlier during a private walk on a quiet golf course, where no one was recording minutes and no assistants were present. If you spend your life studying the official meeting notes, you are studying a theatrical performance. In the world of high-level influence, the public meeting is where the paperwork is signed, but the table under the table is where the world is actually moved. Those who exert the most power often use the noise of others as a smokescreen. They allow the subordinates to fight over the scraps of ego and presentation, while they quietly align their interests in the shadows. To enter the inner circle, you must stop looking at the person who is shouting the loudest and start identifying the person who only needs a single look to end the war. The real game isn't played in front of a microphone, it's played in the silence between two people who already know exactly what the other wants. Two entrepreneurs, Zhang and Li, decided to open flagship restaurants on the same busy street corner. Zhang spent weeks analyzing foot traffic, counting how many people walked by every hour, and interviewing local shoppers about their favorite cuisines. He invested heavily in a trendy interior and a world-class chef, confident that his hard work and market research would guarantee success. Li, on the other hand, opened a simple, unassuming bistro with a limited menu. He didn't seem to care about the current foot traffic at all. While Zhang was busy perfecting his garnishes, Li was spending his evenings at a private club, talking to a retired urban planner he had known for years. A month after both restaurants opened, the city announced a massive new subway interchange, and a luxury shopping mall would be built exactly behind Li's bistro. Within a year, Zhang's restaurant was struggling with construction dust and blocked roads, while Li's humble shop became the most valuable real estate on the block. Hard work can keep your belly full, but an information gap is what builds an empire. Most people are busy reacting to the world as it appears today, but the elite are operating on a map of what the world will look like tomorrow. Li didn't work harder than Zhang, he simply had a piece of the puzzle that Zhang didn't even know existed. This is called dimensional strike. When you possess information that the market hasn't priced in yet, you aren't competing, you are collecting. The most profitable gold mines aren't found by digging deeper in the same spot as everyone else. They are found by knowing exactly where the fence is going to be moved before the surveyors even arrive. The logic is simple. In a world of noise, the only thing more valuable than gold is a secret that hasn't been told yet. A veteran negotiator was sitting across from a young, aggressive CEO who was desperate to close a partnership deal. The CEO had prepared a brilliant presentation, but the negotiator noticed one thing. The CEO kept adjusting his tie every time the valuation was mentioned. At the peak of the discussion, the negotiator leaned back, chuckled dismissively and said, "Honestly, your numbers look like they were written by an intern. This is amateur hour." The CEO's face turned bright red. He began to stutter, defending his work with rising anger, and eventually blurted out, "We've already spent $2 million on this R&D, we can't just walk away." The negotiator went silent. He now knew the CEO's sunk cost and his desperation. By intentionally pushing a button to trigger an emotional response, the negotiator gained full control of the room. He walked away with a deal that gave him 40% more equity than he had originally planned to ask for. Every time you lose your temper, you are handing a remote control to your opponent. They can press pause on your logic, fast forward on your mistakes, or mute on your leverage. In any high-stakes interaction, the person whose pulse stays steady is the person who writes the script. The young CEO thought he was in a business meeting, but he was actually in a psychological arena where his ego was his greatest liability. To the master communicator, an angry opponent is a predictable opponent. If you can be provoked, you can be steered. The ultimate form of power is not the ability to shout down your enemy, but the ability to remain so unshakable that your opponent becomes exhausted by their own drama. When you have no emotional hooks for others to grab onto, you become a ghost in their machine, completely invisible and impossible to control. A real estate tycoon, known for his fleet of gold-wrapped supercars and loud social media presence, decided he wanted to join the city's most prestigious private investment circle. He viewed everything in life as a transaction. He sent a formal request to the board, offering a donation of $10 million to their charitable foundation as a gesture of his seriousness. He expected a red carpet welcome. Instead, he received a polite, one-sentence rejection letter. A month later, at the Circle's annual gala, a quiet professor in a 10-year-old tweed jacket walked through the doors. He hadn't paid a cent. In fact, the chairman of the board personally met him at the entrance, took his coat, and escorted him to the head table. The tycoon watched from the sidewalk, fuming, unable to understand why his millions were worthless at this particular gate. The truth is that in high-level circles, cash is considered the lowest common denominator. It is the entry requirement for the public, but it is an invisible barrier for the elite. Money is easy to acquire, but resonance and reliability take decades to build. The professor wasn't invited because of his bank balance. He was invited because his research held the key to the next decade of energy policy, and more importantly, he had a 20-year track record of never leaking a secret. The tycoon was a liability, the professor was an asset. If you only focus on accumulating currency, you are building a pile of paper that can be burned. If you focus on building social credit, the kind where people know that bringing you into a room makes the room more valuable, you become the person who gets the call while the others are still trying to buy their way in. The most exclusive doors don't have credit card readers, they have character filters that look for someone who understands the unwritten code of the inner circle. In a mid-sized logistics firm, a quiet operations manager named David sat in a corner office. He wasn't the most charismatic leader, and he certainly wasn't the owner's favorite person. In fact, the owner secretly disliked David's bluntness and had been looking for a reason to replace him with a younger, cheaper cousin for months. One afternoon, the owner called a private meeting to finally push David out. David walked in, sat down, and placed a single encrypted USB drive on the table. He didn't make a threat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I've updated the routing algorithms and the direct contact list for our top 50 international clients. Only this drive has the decryption keys for the next quarter's shipping manifests." The owner's face went pale. He realized that if David walked out that door, the company's entire supply chain would freeze for weeks, costing millions in penalties. The meeting ended not with a firing, but with David receiving a 20% raise and a seat on the board. A stable relationship in the world of power isn't built on liking someone, it is built on the cost of betrayal. The owner didn't keep David because he was loyal or kind, he kept him because the cost of losing him was unbearable. This is the cold logic of being indispensable. If your value to a system is easily replaced, your job security is a myth based on the owner's current mood. But if you hold the architecture of the system, the data, the relationships, or the specific skill that makes the engine run, you create a strategic deadlock. You don't need to be the boss to have power, you just need to be the person who, if removed, causes the whole machine to stop. True security comes from being painful to lose. When you make yourself the only one with the key, you don't have to ask for respect, it is given to you out of the simple necessity of survival. A talented young designer named Alex moved to a new city with big dreams of launching a high-end fashion label. For the first 6 months, he spent every evening at a local bar with a group of friends he'd met at his apartment complex. They were nice people, fun to be around, and always ready for a drink, but the conversations were always the same, complaining about their bosses, gossiping about celebrities, and lamenting how the system was rigged against them. Alex found himself working less and complaining more. His sketches became uninspired. He started believing that his dreams were unrealistic, just like his friends said. One night he looked at the 5 people sitting around the table and realized that if he closed his eyes, he couldn't tell their voices apart. They had become a single collective mind of average expectations. The logic of this silent contagion is mathematical. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, not just in terms of your bank account, but in terms of your ambition, your vocabulary, and your threshold for good enough. Energy is highly infectious. If you are the smartest, most driven person in the room, you are in the wrong room. You aren't leading them, you are being anchored by them. Alex made a brutal decision. He stopped answering the group texts. He spent his evenings at a co-working space for tech founders and high-level creatives. He didn't even talk to them at first. He just sat in the same air as people who were discussing global expansion and complex problem-solving. Within 3 months, his output tripled. His worth didn't change because he worked harder. It changed because he stopped breathing the air of mediocrity. Cutting off low-value social circles isn't being mean. It is an act of self-preservation. Deep in a dense forest, a veteran hunter tracked a predator that had been terrorizing a local village. The younger hunters in the village were impatient. They carried heavy rifles and fired at every rustle in the bushes, hoping for a lucky hit. By noon, they were out of ammunition and had to retreat, leaving themselves vulnerable. The veteran, however, moved in total silence. He never raised his rifle, even when he saw the beast in the distance. He waited. He watched. The predator began to grow uneasy. It knew the hunter was there, but it didn't know how many shots he had, where he was aiming, or what kind of traps he had set. The unknown created a psychological pressure so intense that the beast eventually fled the territory without a single shot being fired. The hunter's greatest weapon wasn't his bullet, it was the fact that he hadn't used it yet. In the world of business and high-stakes negotiation, your greatest leverage is what people don't know about you. The moment you show your full hand, your exact budget, your final deadline, or your deepest fears, you have surrendered your power. Most people feel a desperate need to prove how smart or wealthy they are by talking constantly. They lay out all their cards on the table just to get a nod of approval. But the master of influence knows that true vulnerability is letting people see your bottom line. All real deterrents come from the hidden ace. If people don't know the extent of your resources or the limits of your patience, they will always treat you with a degree of caution. Keeping your mouth shut and your bullets in the chamber creates an aura of deep water. People are afraid to dive into water when they can't see the bottom. By staying undiscovered, you ensure that the world always treats you with the respect reserved for the unpredictable.